0616 3003 2026 JTV.
If you look at a map of the sea around Arabia, you'll see there are two main pinch points. One we've spoken about a lot recently is the Strait of Hormuz. The other is on the southern side of the Arabian Peninsula, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's just 16 miles wide, but an eighth of the world's shipping passes through it. How badly will it be affected now the Houthi rebels in Yemen have entered the war? Well, I'm joined by Peter Eilert, the Director of Policy at the UK Chamber of Shipping. Good morning.
Good morning.
What is your concern, if I assume you are concerned, about this particular strait? It's 16 miles wide. It does seem to take in terms of shipping. And the Houthis are now saying that they can effectively close this too. What would be the impact of that?
So it's quite different from the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz, I think everyone is aware now, is an absolutely critical pathway shipping, and 20% of energy coming out of the Persian Gulf. Bab el-Mandeb is not so critical in the sense there are other routes the vessels can take. Very clearly, when the Houthis attacked the Red Sea previously, it caused significant disruption. Significant number of vessels were attacked. But in terms of flow of energy, flow of goods, it doesn't have the same impact of the Straits of Hormuz. It's not critical in the same sense. But the challenge here is the combination of both being closed. And the reason for that is discharge of energy products from Saudi Arabia. At the moment, obviously, oil coming out of Saudi Arabia is not able to come through the Straits of Hormuz with the current threats from the Iranians. But oil is now being piped across Saudi to the Red Sea, where tankers are discharging energy products. And consequently, there is an impact here that those vessels, if the Bab el-Mandeb Straits were closed, wouldn't be able to access from there. And the only way they would be able to access Saudi Arabia would be through the Suez Canal, which obviously creates even more disruption to the flow of shipping and the flow of energy products.
Can you quantify the position of those two straits being closed in terms of an economic impact globally?
Well, very broad, the amount of it out of the Persian Gulf before the crisis with Iran and the US and Israel was about 20 to 25%, depending whether it's gas and oil. When you're looking at Bab el-Mandeb Straits, the impact is different in the sense of where those sources are coming from, as I just described. So you're probably looking about an impact of maybe 5 to 8% in that region. But at the moment, I just would like to reiterate the military assessment of the threats to shipping in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Straits has not been raised as we speak. There have been attacks from the Houthi rebels on Israel directly, but no attacks on ships. And at the moment, that threat level hasn't been raised.
Can you give us a picture of what's going on right now in the Strait of Hormuz? We've been talking about it now consistently for a couple of weeks, and there are suggestions that the UK will send a minesweeper vessel to the region to try and help with efforts to keep it open. What's happening there right now?
So we've got a little bit of a trickle now of ships coming out of the Straits of Hormuz, almost all exclusively heading towards Asia. There were 2 Chinese container vessels that attempted to go through the Straits over the weekend and turned back. So the trickle of ships coming through are obviously vessels that don't have a nexus with allied campaign between Israel and Iran. So vessels that are very clearly nations that have been friendly to Iran in terms of trading. So I'm thinking of China and more recently India, Malaysia, and Thailand. But I think the other point about the situation is that Iran has offered that for the payment of a levy, they'll allow vessels to go through. And I think this is probably the situation, and probably those vessels that have turned back have not been able to transfer the levy that they need to get through the Straits.
So that is now very definitely happening. We were talking about that last week. Very much, really great to get your take.
Thank you.
That's Peter Eilert there, the Director of Policy at the UK Chamber of Shipping.
7:27, the President of the Law Society is the latest high-profile lawyer to warn against the government's jury reforms. Richard Atkinson says that reducing the number of jury trials could put women at greater risk of domestic violence. The argument is that David Lammy's underestimated how long magistrates will take dealing with more serious cases, and so the backlog will grow rather than get smaller. He believes that one group particularly affected by that would be women being abused. Another critic is the barrister Flora Page KC, who represented wrongly convicted sub-postmasters. She resigned from the Legal Services Watchdog to focus on campaigning against the government's reforms. Flora can talk to us now. Flora, morning to you.
Good morning.
Why do you feel so strongly about this?
The right to trial by jury is something that's very deeply embedded in our constitution, and the urge to reduce it, the urge to make trials something that is controllable and out of the hands of the people of this country is just deeply misguided. We need to keep criminal justice something that the people understand and are part of.
Is there a danger, though, that we're fetishizing a system not universally followed around the world, and we probably wouldn't invent it, had to come up with a judicial system from scratch, we wouldn't invent the jury? It's a clear and important part of our history, but times maybe we have to just change with them.
We would change if it was obvious that there was something better, but unfortunately, going to judge-alone trials, which is what the government wants to do, is going to something worse, which we know because we already have judge-alone trials and we use them where we must for relatively minor offences, but for anything which is a serious offence, there is nothing better than 12 ordinary people who come to it without prejudices and who are able to take, for example, a domestic violence case where they need to weigh up the evidence of 2 people, and nearly always that's what it boils down to. Who better than people to decide whether they have been convinced that a person has committed a crime?
Are you worried about this impact on magistrates' courts, and effectively everything just gets pushed downstream a little bit, and then you end up with clogged magistrates' courts, clogged anywhere else?
Absolutely. I do appear in the magistrates recently on behalf of a client who had already had his magistrates' court trial adjourned from August of last year. He had been listed alongside 3 other trials, even though his trial was a full-day trial, and the other side weren't ready, in other words, the prosecution, and it was a good excuse for the magistrates to say, okay, well, we've got all of these other trials to deal with, so he was adjourned off again. I mean, these things are, they're simple. They're driven by driving down the costs and putting sitting days in the Crown Courts so that there aren't enough sitting days to hear all the cases, and underfunding the whole system. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with
the more sitting days, longer sitting days, more buildings to sit cases in, filling up the buildings that we do have, which costs money. That's the answer to all of this. It's not a jury issue, it's a money issue.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's always been a money issue. The criminal justice system has been starved of money over successive governments for the entire time that I've been working in criminal justice, and eventually it breaks.
And is it broken now, do you think?
It's so damn close that, I mean, when you've got people waiting years and years for trials, yes, it's pretty broken.
Flora, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. As Flora Page, KC, see a fairly sober indictment of the current legal position.
It is 7:31. The US is preparing to put ground troops in Iran. We'll hear what that might mean for escalation of the conflict. Involvement next. That's after the news with Andy Hayes.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Time.
Won't be offering more for people struggling with their energy bills because of the Iran war. There are concerns about rising prices and jet fuel predicted in the next few weeks. The former Tory Prime Minister Liz Truss launched a major energy bailout after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Reynolds has told Times Radio there'll be no repeat of that.
We will do all that we can to keep costs down, but equally, we are not going to provide blanket support as the last government did, because that meant that we are spending so much money now on just servicing government debt, £100 billion just to service government debt, the debt that we inherited from the previous government, given the actions that they took.
Counter-terror police are helping with an investigation after 7 people were seriously injured after a car hit people in Derby city centre. A 36-year-old man from India was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. He remains in custody. And a new book says Prince Philip had pancreatic cancer for 8 years before he died. Hugo Vickers, the royal historian, says the Duke of Edinburgh was diagnosed with an inoperable form of the disease in June 2013. He died at Windsor Castle in 20 months before his 100th birthday. And for a roundup of the news on demand, find the Times Radio News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
It's the most wonderful time of the
With Nationwide. Everywhere Nationwide has a branch, it promises to still be there to...
Lots of people concerned about this question of petrol supply and prices. And one of the things we kind of debated this morning is the government tonally, factually getting it right? We absolutely understand, don't we? They don't want to cause a panic. They do not want to say something that makes everyone rush out to go to a petrol station. We'd run out of petrol very quickly that way. But the flip side of that is, and Michael makes the point, is the UK is heavily reliant on petroleum derivatives, as most other EU and Asian countries are. Evidence from every other country is they're making provisions. However, the UK is totally fine. Colin's saying you could drive at 60 miles an hour, not 70 miles an hour, and save maybe 20% more fuel efficient. They're talking about that in Ireland. In Australia, they're talking about that. In lots of other countries, they are saying, maybe just change your behaviour a little bit. This war could go on a long time. Let's all be a bit sensible and grown up about this. The government is very much, everything's fine.
Well, I think the difference is what you're talking about is people cope with the price rises that have already happened. So many of us are getting in touch and saying, this is already a problem for me because it's costing me more to fill my car up. So any advice to help people make the fuel go further would actually be a really good thing. Now, some people might say that's not really the job of a government, and people can do that themselves. But I think that's very different from telling people, to stock up and panic and make sure you've got tins. Obviously, no government is going to do that. But I think it's about your relationship with the public and how grown up you are able.
But you kept trying to make to Emma Rails, but she didn't really get that if we have an intelligent relationship between politics and maybe COVID, actually, we all thought we'd be a better, more resilient country than we turned out to be in COVID, where there was panic buying.
I wonder if we're making that same mistake again. I wonder if actually that some of these governments are having a very honest and open conversation with their populations. And maybe part of the problem here is we have a government that's instinct is not to do that. The government's instinct is to say nothing until you have to say something.
Yeah, exactly right.
But everybody here recognises that things have already changed.
And in this war, we're about to talk about this. So what happens in a month's time, 6 weeks' time, or 2 months' time? We're going to talk to the Road Haulers Association. They're seeing pump they go around the country. We'll also talk to Claire Coutinho in about 10 minutes' time, the Shadow Energy Secretary. Would the Tories do something different to that? Andrew Neil is presenting the Times at 1. He'll pop in at 8:50 to our show to let us know what he thinks about all this stuff. Jane and Fee are on air from 2 o'clock, and John Pino will bring you Times Radio Drive from 4.
It's 7:37. American Central Command released pictures over the weekend of US Marines training on Diego Garcia. They showed the elite forces wading through the sea, practicing storming a beach. More than 2,000 of those Marines have now arrived in the Gulf region aboard USS Tripoli. They're accompanied by support vessels, fighter jets, and helicopters. Are these the people Donald Trump expects to take Iran's cruise on Karg Island? He said overnight that his forces could seize the island easily. Justin Crump is a former British Army officer and chief executive of the global intelligence consultant Sibylline. Good morning.
Good morning.
Looking at the troop movements, and this is, I suspect, a good indicator of what Donald Trump is thinking, given what we saw over the previous couple of weeks. Yeah. What do you think he is going to attempt to do next?
I mean, the Pentagon's made it clear throughout this that their role, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs actually said this explicitly several times, their role is to give the commander-in-chief options, to give the president options. He lays out the objectives for the war that they're not really calling a war because it's not technically a war, but he lays out the war objectives and the Pentagon gives him options to deliver it. They've been doing that largely at the moment from the air, as we've seen. That's not entirely worked. I think it's been a great operationally successful campaign of bombing. I think it's achieved its objectives. The US hasn't lost many aircraft. Relatively successful military campaign without doubt. That hasn't necessarily moved the strategic end to the war any closer. So the ground troops option now is about how can we ratchet up the pressure on Iran, either to have a total win. Remember the days when Donald Trump was talking about unconditional surrender of Iran was when he decided it was. So can it help drive that option? Or does it drive towards a diplomatic settlement, which is the middle option for this? And of course, sadly, the third option for the conflict, which is perhaps still the most likely at the moment, is the US doesn't achieve an outright military victory. It doesn't achieve enough pressure to force a diplomatic settlement, or that isn't brought about. And so the conflict escalates, drags on. This option, or this range of military options, doesn't work, which are comparatively limited ground force options. I mean, it looks impressive, 10,000 troops in total, airborne and marine, sounds impressive. Iran has 90 million people, is the terrain of Afghanistan, but the size of Afghanistan and Iraq, with the human terrain factors of Iraq as well. Plus, it's all on Hormuz. I mean, it's an enormous proposition, and 10,000 troops can nudge something, but really, they're certainly not there for a massive ground invasion of Iran or to take the country over. They're there to try and do something that pushes this situation on for the Americans.
Well, if you are not just talking about taking, but also holding that territory. The New York Times has reported that 13 US bases in the Gulf are uninhabitable because of drone strikes. Is Iran being actually fairly affecting, and it's sort of preventing of America at scale, I suppose?
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing, 4 weeks plus into the campaign. Iran, the first couple of days, they fired quite a lot of ballistic missiles, and a lot of the comments about the campaign, particularly from the US military side, have been about how much the rate of missile fire has fallen since day one. That's not really a great comparison. I think really you need to look at sort of day 4 or 5 and the Iranians settled in a bit more, and the rate of missiles and drones has been broadly constant. So without doubt, Iran has suffered attrition in its drones and missiles, but they've been able to keep things coming. And I think one of the key points for me is that they threatened reprisals for the attack on the gas fields in the Gulf, the Iranian gas fields, and managed to deliver on that. And lots of people make threats they can't carry through on if they're being constrained. It has managed to get things through. It does manage to strike targets it says it will strike. It's real danger. They're still getting missiles through against Israel, for example. And Iran doesn't have to get a lot. I wouldn't say that the US bases are uninhabitable due to the threat, but I would say they're unpleasant due to the threat. And it's quite high risk to operate bases. And the argument here is that the US, especially with the movement towards ground intervention in some way, in some place in the region, is having to take more and more risk. So they started off not really taking very much risk, and that risk has mounted actually throughout this. And that's something that's notable. And I know it's very high in the Pentagon's mind and it's high in the president's mind, because of course, if the cost in lives and equipment and material of this campaign mounts and mounts and mounts, that's a real problem for Donald Trump. So he's in this race to fix this quickly and win. You can't just chicken out and give the Iranians everything they want. So it looks like they won. But the Iranians get a vote on this, and they still have the capability of making this difficult for the United States.
Justin, just finally and briefly, if you can, is there a risk now that actually just stopping here where we are, and that's what some people say America needs to do, that this itself is problematic for the future about where Iran is?
Yes, I mean, it's unleashed. It's kind of put us on a more dangerous path with Iran than we were on, hasn't it? And, it's a hurt Iran, it's a more distrustful Iran, it's a more angry Iran, it's Iran that has less to lose than it did this year. So, yeah, it's on a path that either the US has to have this final victory for the region, and that slight feeling, especially for the GCC countries, there's going to be no living with Iran after this, which, again, does not help, leads to a rapid outcome, a peaceful outcome, this all calming down and settling down. I mean, it can do, but it's going to require some quite extraordinary behind the scenes. I just don't see the evidence is taking place. It's clear between the two sides, and time's in Iran's favour.
Justin, thank you very much. Great to have you with us this morning.
Thanks, Kate.
That is Justin Crumper, former Army officer.
And that's perhaps why Trump's messages are so contradictory, because there is no one clear route out of this, is there? And we keep coming back to that point that he can't really stop going on. It's a great point from Justin Crump there, that as you go on longer and longer, the risk goes up, and that's going to be a problem for talking to people. They don't want to see American coffins flying back from Iran, do they?
They're already seeing that. They don't want to see any more.
I mean, still, because Paul says, by the way, I've noticed how slower everyone is driving and roads are much quieter, so change is happening. If people have changed their behaviour already because of petrol prices or the fear about petrol supply, that would be really interesting. So if you've noticed it, if you're doing it yourself, do let us know this morning at ww3
It is 7:44 and it's time for our daily quiz question.
In Scotland, which verdict was officially abolished this year?
We'll reveal the answer at 8:15, and don't forget there are 15 more questions in the Times Daily Quiz, available now on the app and on the website.
7:44, next we'll catch up with the Conservatives, and before 8, I think Kate and I have completely different views on this one. Does listening to music
It may surprise you to hear.
really help you study?
No, obviously not. It's a massive distraction.
Here we go, I can only write to music. Anyway, this is really into that. This is Times Radio. What is that?
Iran's parliament has warned the US that Iran's military is waiting for a ground attack and ready to rain fire upon any troops that try to enter Iranian territory. He claimed Donald Trump is planning a ground operation in secret. His comments come as fresh reports in the Washington Post suggest the Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations in Iran. The Pentagon hasn't commented yet. More than 3,000 US troops arrived in the region on Friday on board the USS Tripoli. But Donald Trump has claimed in recent days that talks with Iran have been going very well. Meanwhile, Iran has threatened to target Israeli and American universities in the Middle East in retaliation for a strike on a university in Tehran. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps warned staff and students, as well as nearby residents, to keep a distance of 1 kilometre from American universities in the region. It comes as the Houthis in Yemen keep targeting Israel in the coming days. Their first attacks began. The group, which is backed by Iran, says it fired 2 waves of on Saturday. This report from our World Affairs correspondent Joe Inwood.
High above the Middle East, an Israeli jet refuels, ready for another operation. This is the image the US and Israel of precision, of control. But on the ground, it appears Iran is still fighting back. There are reports in the US that the use of ground troops is now being considered. Thousands of Marines are in the region. The Washington Post to take either Karg Island or launch coastal raids. Responding on social media, the president simply said, no, Trump is not losing his nerve on Iran. But the threat of ground forces is clearly being taken seriously. The Speaker of Iran's parliament told the state news agency the enemy openly sends of negotiation plans for a ground attack. Our men are waiting to set them on fire and punish their regional partners forever. And that punishment is already being felt. This was today, while the UAE said it suffered its heaviest attacks in weeks. The news that the Houthis, an armed Yemeni faction aligned to Iran, have now joined the war opens a new front.
Our armed forces carried out the second military operation using a barrage of cruise missiles and drones, targeting several vital military sites of the Zionist occupied Palestine.
The Houthis could threaten the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which has provided an alternate route for some Saudi oil. If that were closed, the consequences for the global economy would be devastating. Here in the UK, the government says this country can cope.
As you would expect, we will continue to keep under review all of the measures we currently have in place, and if anything is needed in the future. But your viewers should be reassured that where it comes to energy prices, in terms of what they will be paying for domestic supplies, we are making sure that is capped until the end of June. We've taken action to support consumers.
There are diplomatic efforts underway to bring this all to an end. Talks are being held, but only involving Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey. Israel and Iran are not taking. They all claim they are now winning this war, and no one looks ready to compromise. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Let's speak to Sasha Bruchman, who's Research Fellow for Defence and Military Analysis at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, joining us from Doha. Sasha Bruchman, thank you for talking to us. I wonder, first of all, what your thoughts are 1 month into this war with no real end in sight.
Good. Well, yes, it seems we have settled into a bit of a no longer the first or second round of this boxing match where we're trying to gather information about how the ferocity of each other and the constitution of the enemy. But it now seems like both faced. It seems a bit more slow, as in continuous attacks on states in Israel. They have not died down. The Iranians have been able to retaliate, continue retaliation, albeit at a much lower level. So when the chairman of the Iran's retaliation has dropped by 90% in terms of UAV attacks, I think I can see something similar in the data. But this is kind of the stalemate where we are.
Iran ministry reported power outages in Tehran and surrounding areas.
Despite the difference, absolute defiance that continues to occur on the latest from the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament saying Iran is waiting for a ground attack by the US and will fire on any troops. Despite all that, you think there is a military run. How strong do you think Iran feels?
I mean, we have to disentangle what the military weakening means. The missile and the UAV sorties have definitely gone. The Iranian Navy knows its de facto, but its forces have been much less affected by the war thus far. So there's something to be considered. Now, I want to be at the end of a US Marine Corps attack, whether that's a MACTF, a Marine Assault Force Corps, or whether it's a MU, what they're sending now, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. And the problem for the Iranians will be that an amphibious assault is hard to predict. It's hard to predict where it comes in. Marines can come by a tilt helicopter, the airspace. They can raid ashore with their amphibious vehicles or with small boats. Or they could come into port. They are very specifically configured for these functions, for these amphibious assaults. And with the USS Tripoli and her group, with two other ships, the San Diego and the New Orleans, they're mobile. So therefore, they hold an entire strip of coast at risk. And on the other hand, you have the president or the establishment in Washington talking about Khark Island, but there are other islands that could be at risk in this entire Iranian coastline. So it's very hard to predict where it will strike eventually.
And what do you read into that troop build-up? I've just described that additional 3,000 or more troops arriving on the USS Tripoli just on Friday.
So yeah, I think the group has about 2,500 combined sailors and Marines. I think 2,000. Often we read 2,200 is given as the number of Marines. So you have Khark Island, which is a small island, but it's strategically significant because the oil export infrastructure is located on the island. And I think, as I said, Washington has floated this idea. I'm not certain, I cannot understand what the strategic advantage is to taking the oil export infrastructure, because the Iranian ships have to pass the Strait of Hormuz and then go into the pass, literally. The American ships, for example, the Washington and its destroyers. So if US had to seize, destroy, or stop Iranian oil exports, it could do so by attacking those ships in many ways, whether that's destroying or just halting them or sending teams on to board those ships. So Khark Island is a bit of a question mark for me. Not tactically, it's perfectly viable, but strategically. I find the islands near the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz more interesting from a tactical point of view. So west you have Abu Musa and the Greater Nasotun Islands, which are claimed by the United Arab Emirates, which could sort as like observation posts to sort and filter, because the troops, Iranian troops, hail Bandar Abbas or Tehran and say, this tanker is approaching, we can identify this. Do we have an agreement with this country or with shipping line? And then further east at the more narrow point is Kishim Island and the island of Hormuz, after which the strait is named, a coast from which UAVs, for example, are fired. So you have the observation and reconnaissance side, or the effectors from where the UAVs are being launched. Those are, together with Hormuz, three strategic options. And the fourth one is, you could just sail the Tripoli up and down the coastline and see how every bit of decision is intelligent. Right? Generals will have to call Tehran. People will have to mobilize troops, will have to move, being soaked up by US and Israeli intelligence, and could then inform whatever course of action will be taken in the end.
You're in the Gulf there in Doha. Just give us, in a few words, if you like, we're running out of time. How effective do you think Iran's tactic, Iran's strategy of targeting its Gulf neighbours is proving to be in this war?
So, effective on a strategic sense, it is not, because I think it's actually decision-making to stand to distance themselves more from Iran, understandably so. We're literally under fire. Tactically, operationally, it has not brought down any of the Gulf states, right? UAE has been subjected to, I think, 400 missiles and 2,000 drones by now. It has not yielded, bent the knee to Iran and not destroyed. Same true for Kuwait, even Bahrain, the smallest one, which has been struck a few times. So strategically, I think the Gulf states have actually moved a bit closer to the United States afterwards. And tactically, operationally, it has not yielded any kind of submission. The forces of these countries, as well as the societies, are resilient, more resilient at least, than the Iranians had hoped for.
Sasha Bruckman, a research fellow for Defence and Military Analysis at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you for joining us from...
Make breakthroughs. Make your mark.
Bluetooth mode.
Israel carried out Iran. Powerful explosions hit Tehran and the port city of Bandar Hamir as Israel carried out another wave of strikes. Israel killed another 2 paramedics in Lebanon as it continued to target Iran's ally Hezbollah amid widespread anger at an airstrike that killed 3 journalists yesterday. An Israeli soldier was killed in southern Lebanon as Iran and Hezbollah continue to fire missiles at Israel and its troops. And aluminium facilities in Bahrain and Abu Dhabi were hit by Iranian strikes following attacks on Iranian steel plants. Iran has also threatened to attack Israeli and American universities in the region if the US does not condemn the bombing of its universities by noon on Monday. And after Iran's Houthi allies in Yemen joined the war firing missiles at Israel, the EU's naval mission issued a shipping alert for the Red Sea. It's feared the Houthis will resume attacks on ships in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, exacerbating the economic crisis caused by Iran's effective closure Strait of Hormuz. Amelia Jen reports.
I spent 20 years paying my bills before I realized they can actually pay me back. It's called
Another night of explosions in Tehran as the US-Israeli war against it enters a second month. In a video released today by the Iranian Red Crescent organization, a survivor is found beneath the rubble. Thank God, one of the response team says as he confirms his name. Among the buildings struck were the office of Qatar-based news channel Al Arab with 10 people injured.
The missile hit, this thing fell in our heads. It was a real miracle.
Days after the American Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the war would be over in weeks and not months, the Washington Post reports that the Pentagon has drafted plans for ground operations with Donald Trump to be asked whether or not to sign them off. Previous US ground have been controversial, and costly, perhaps why he's previously ruled another one out, and why the very question retained him so much.
What are circumstances where you sent in ground troops? How are you thinking about that? I don't even want to talk about it now. I mean, I don't think it's an appropriate question. You know, I'm not going to answer. Where you sent in ground troops? How are you thinking about that? I don't even want to talk about it now. I mean, I don't think it's an appropriate. I don't think it's an appropriate question. You know, I'm not going to answer it. Could there be? Possibly, for very good reason. Have to be very good reason. And I would say if we ever did that, they would be so decimated that they wouldn't be able to fight at the ground level. Have to be very good reason. And I would say if we ever did that, they would be so decimated that they wouldn't be able to fight at the ground level.
As Iran released videos of what it described as the region, hit an industrial complex in southern Israel, its parliament speaker said the army was waiting for the arrival of them on the ground to, quote, set them on fire. Southern Israel, its parliament speaker said the army was waiting for the arrival of American troops on the ground to, quote, set them on fire. With its Air Force and Navy severely weakened, it believes fighting on the ground is its strongest.
We announced that the warriors of Islam have been waiting for such actions for a long time to prove that aggression
is its strongest suit.
We announced that the warriors of Islam have been waiting for such for a long time to prove that aggression and occupation will not result in anything other than the humiliating captivity and dismemberment, and American commanders and soldiers will become good food for the sharks of the Persian Gulf.
This weekend, the arrival of American troops on the ground to, quote, set them on fire. With its Air Force and Navy severely weakened, it believes fighting on the ground is its strongest suit.
We announce that the warriors of Islam have been waiting for such actions for a long time. To prove that aggression and occupation will not result in...
This weekend, the USS Tripoli warship carrying more than 2,000 American Marines arrived in the region from Asia. It was reported the Pentagon's ground invasion plans would involve raids rather than a full-scale invasion, something the unpredictable US president will now be weighing up. Trump once campaigned on avoiding endless wars. He's now caught in a war of his own starting, whose aims and timeline are becoming increasingly elastic.
Protesting on a motorway near Lyon. Nous allons aller au... At the rising price of fuel, protest. French lorry drivers angry. French lorry drivers angry at the rising price of fuel, protesting on a motorway near Lyon.
Nous allons aller au contact de ces gens-là, We will block 50 to 100 vehicles, then explain to drivers that we are calling for controls on fuel prices. If prices come down, it will benefit them as well. Once the message is understood, we will let them pass.
Bulgarian taxi drivers, though, are staying off, other expenses rising and customers falling. They say their trips can make a loss. This driver says making a profit is difficult, and many colleagues are looking for other jobs. They want the government to reduce taxes. That's something Poland has already introduced. The government there has reduced VAT on fuel from 23% to 8% and set maximum prices. The Polish Prime Minister says people should see a change at the pumps by Easter. Russia is a big producer of oil, and the Kremlin plans to ease pressures by stopping exports of petrol from April. Russian oil is subject to sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine, but the restriction will still reduce the amount of refined gasoline available elsewhere in the world. In Australia, they're trying a different approach.
We are making public transport free.
But the restriction will still reduce the amount of refined gasoline. In Australia, they're trying a different approach.
We are making public transport free for a month.
Is a big producer. Kremlin plans to ease pressures by stopping exports of petrol from April. Russian oil is subject to sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine, but the restriction will still reduce the amount of refined gasoline available elsewhere in the world. In Australia, they're trying a different...
We are making public transport free for a month, starting from Tuesday the 31st of...
Victoria is that free train, tram and bus fares will reach petrol and diesel in private cars.
This is a temporary measure, but it's a temporary measure that's going to help Victorian households and families right now.
Meanwhile, in Manila, Transport reduced the use of petrol and diesel in private cars.
This is a temporary free for a month, starting from Tuesday the 31st of March.
The hope in the state of Victoria is that free train, tram and bus fares will reduce the use of petrol in private cars.
This is a temporary measure, but it's a temporary measure that's going to help Victorian households and families right now.
Meanwhile, in Manila, transport workers have been out on strike, demanding not just wages and fares.
It's a temporary measure that's going to help Victorian households and families right now.
Meanwhile, in Manila, transport workers have been out on strike, demanding not just a cut in fuel costs, but also increases in wages and fares. Elsewhere in the world, they're looking at alternatives to oil. Brazil has a long history of using ethanol, produced from cane sugar, to fuel vehicles, and that has protected them from some of the global price rises.
We have flexibility in ethanol production in vehicle engines and also for the federal government, which sets the percentage of ethanol in the fuel blend. So we have 3 levels. That advantage Tree has.
Other countries, including India and Mexico, are now paying close attention to Brazil's model. And then there's the United States. Organisers say more than 3,000 no kings pro towns and cities across the country. It isn't just fuel prices that have sparked the demonstrations. Organisers say more than 3,000 no kings protests were registered in towns and cities across the country, complaining about the leadership of President Trump. It isn't just fuel prices that have sparked the demonstrations. Organisers say more than 3,000 no kings protests registered in towns and cities across the country, complaining about the leadership of President Trump. It isn't just fuel prices that have sparked the demonstrations, but many people say their cost of living doesn't match the picture they hear painted in the White House.
I see the difference in the prices. Look at the gas. And every time
it isn't, but many people say their cost of living doesn't match the picture they hear painted in the White House.
I see the difference in gas. And every time I go to
it isn't just fuel prices that have sparked the demonstrations, but many people say their cost of living doesn't match the picture they hear painted in the White House.
I see the difference in the prices. Look at the gas. And every time I go to the grocery store every week, things have gone up.
Or inflation is up, or gas prices are up, or food prices
they hear painted in the White House.
I see the difference in the prices. Look at the gas. And every time I go to the grocery store every week, things have gone up.
Or inflation is up, or gas prices are up, or food prices are up, but yet he's saying the alternative.
He's not taking care of us. He's supposed to be taking care of us first.
Back home, there are no signs of a shortage, but
or inflation is up, or gas prices are up, or food prices are up, but yet he's saying the alternative.
He's not taking care of us. He's supposed to be taking care of us first.
Or inflation is up, or gas prices are up, food prices are up, but yet he's saying the alternative.
He's not taking care of us. He's supposed to be taking care of us.
Or inflation is up, or gas prices are up, or food prices are up, but yet he's saying the alternative.
Not taking care of us. He's supposed to be taking care of us first.
Bluetooth mode.